You know, kids these days have it so easy with the internet, there's nothing left to the imagination anymore. But back when I was younger, when you'd come across any kind of media that had scantily clad women or outright nudity, it was kind of exciting. In the 1990s, Jill the Jungle used to do it for me. Later on, it would be Kate Archer and Joanna Dark, and then case in point, you've got Julie from Heavy Metal Fact 2. Heavy Metal Fact 2 is a third-person shooter developed by Ritual Entertainment that serves as a sequel to the animated film Heavy Metal 2000, which was in turn a sequel to the 1980s animated film Heavy Metal. Featuring a female protagonist based off and voiced by real-life Penthouse model and actress Julie Strain, it was a game where you ventured through a fantasy world armed with swords and guns, cutting alien creatures to pieces while decked out in the kind of outfits you'd only see in a dominatrix dungeon. Not that I know anything about that. As a really early example of a game combining shooting, puzzle solving, and platforming, it does in a lot of ways show its age, mostly in the controls, but its unique story and gorgeous art style still make it worth playing, problems aside. Now, if you've never seen Heavy Metal 2000 or even Heavy Metal, then this might end up being kind of an issue because the game starts off with no real backstory or even any kind of setup for certain characters, and it seems to work off the notion that you're familiar with the setting and the events that have occurred prior to the game's events. In a nutshell, what's happening is that you're a woman named Julie, some kind of immortal, ass-kicking goddess living on the planet of Eden with her family and friends, until the place is attacked by a creature known as Gith, who bombards the planet's surface with asteroids and sends his minions to town to kill everyone in sight. It's then up to Julie to fight back and stop Gith once and for all, which is a journey that takes her from one side of the planet to the other, from her hometown of Eden, across cliff sides, through caves and swamps, and then even facing a lot of bizarre spiritual challenges as she proves her worth. Being kind of based off the cartoon, there's a lot of lengthy cinematics in the game, often where Julie is chatting away to someone who reveals some kind of important new plot element, or gives her some kind of new weapon or item she's going to need in her journey.
Here, try them out! They're a blast!
Throughout the game too, there's loads and loads of fan service. Julie has about 3 or 4 different outfit changes throughout the game, all of which are revealing and show off her greatest assets as a bit of a nod to how she's portrayed in the film. There's one point early on in the game where her clothes are all torn and tattered after she's captured, which is really just keeping in line with the whole B-movie vibe that seems Ritual Entertainment are going for. It's a real tongue-in-cheek, harmless tone that's kept up throughout the entire game, and nothing's ever really meant to be taken seriously. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, criticize how unrealistic it is that a woman wearing a leather bikini is able to take on droves and droves of aliens and come out without a scratch, but that's kinda missing the point. I could also complain about the voice acting, which is kinda cringy sometimes, but I feel like that's a bit redundant, considering the source material wasn't exactly winning Oscars.
Say, wait a minute. I hope you're not here for... It's mine, I tell you! It belongs to me! Me!
Visually, Heavy Metal is about what you'd expect from an early 2000s game running on the Quake 3 engine. It obviously shows its age a little bit with low polygon models and some basic animations, but the artistry in the game is nothing short of amazing. Some of the environments you're going to see in this game are just stunning in terms of the level of creativity and uniqueness, particularly some of the later stages in the game, where you're performing some of these weird rituals and challenges in these bizarre looking alien temples. The in-game visual options has a setting for turning on or off excessive violence, which will be on by default just so you can enjoy how over the top the gore is in this game. When you're using any of the melee weapons, you'll notice how enemies just kind of explode upon death, losing limbs and sending spurts of blood in all directions. It's kind of rad too that this game pretty much runs without hiccups on modern hardware. It's a game from that time period where you're really just rolling the dice and hoping for the best in terms of performance and stability. In fact, if anything, I'd say it's more stable nowadays. I remember this game was notorious for bugs and crashing when it was originally released. Gameplay-wise, Heavy Metal is, as I said before, a mix of shooting, platforming, and puzzle solving, mostly just shooting and platforming though. The central theme of the gameplay is the usage of water as a resource. One of the main plot elements is how the water on the planet gives eternal life to people who drink it. And Julie is stronger when her own water meter is kept high from either standing in pools of water throughout the game world or drinking from water power-ups dropped by enemies or scattered around the environment. In fact, certain weapons don't even unlock their true power unless your water meter is stocked up. But I'd say probably the most unique aspect of the combat is how you can equip weapons individually in the left or right hand. You are forced to equip swords in the right hand by default, but you can put anything else of your choosing in the left hand, ideally a pistol, Uzi, or a plasma bow, able to use either of them with the right or left mouse button during combat. Or you could also equip a shield to help you deflect incoming attacks. Certain weapons require 2 hands, like the shotgun, the rocket launcher, and some bigger melee weapons like the axe and the chainsaw sword, and this is offset by the fact that those weapons do a little bit more damage. Later in the game you can dual wield Uzis, and the game's even clever enough to allow you to target 2 enemies at once, firing individually with the left or right hand, which looks pretty awesome in the way it's been integrated into the animations. I will say that selecting weapons can be a bit clunky at times and a little bit hard to do seamlessly during combat. Simply wanting to swap from the pistol in your left hand to the shield, for instance, can take longer than it really should, which is kind of the downside to the complexity of allowing weapons to be equipped in this manner. When you get the hang of it though, the combat is a hell of a lot of fun. You just feel like an absolute badass at times, gunning enemies down with your dual Uzis before swapping to the sword and hacking them to pieces. Now I do think the weapon lineup has a few problems though. For starters, the chainsaw, sword and the flamethrower are cool additions, but they burn through their ammo supply in seconds, making them really ineffective most of the time. You're given a slingshot early in the game too, which does pretty much bugger all damage and is literally only needed once in the entire game to flick a button from a distance, and all it does the remainder of the time is take up a weapon slot. And the same thing with the thermal detonator. You need to use this early on for a boss fight, and then there's honestly not a single other situation in the entire game where you have to use it or even really need to. My point is that having these weapons taking up a slot for the sake of taking up a slot, I think is what makes the controls as clunky as they are, and I think that simply removing redundant items like these would have made the controls a lot more fluid. Speaking of controls and clunky, there's the platforming. Now you do have to kind of cut the game a bit of slack in this regard because of how old it is, and I think the problem nowadays is that we're all kind of used to games like the Uncharted series where it's almost impossible to fail the platforming sections. I mean, in the Uncharted games you just kind of have to jump in the general direction of a ledge and you're going to grab it. Platforming in Heavy Metal works maybe 75% of the time. Mostly you'll leap for a ledge and Julie's going to grab onto it, no problem. But there's going to be plenty of instances when you could have sworn you were in range and close enough, and perhaps you even were, yet you'll still just plummet to your death. Regardless of what kind of surface you're on, it feels like you're walking around on ice, and even after landing you'll often do some kind of roll or even just slide a short distance before losing momentum, which is often more than enough to send you over the nearest edge. A lot of the enemies too have some kind of knockback when they hit you, which for a game where 90% of the environments take place on small platforms and ledges can end in lots of deaths. Speaking of enemies in this game, I have to say that this game should win some kind of award for just how fucking annoying the vast majority of them are. I'm not kidding, this game has an enemy roster of the most annoying pricks you're ever going to see in a video game. I mean, like most games get a free pass to have at least one annoying enemy. Half-Life had the head crabs, Doom had the lost souls, Quake had the scrags, you get the picture. But what does it mean when more than half of the lineup is a pain in the ass? First off, you're just fighting these droves of dragonfly-like enemies. In fact, you fight these assholes right throughout the entire game. Once you leave Eden, you start seeing these plants that spit some kind of acid or something at you, and in the swamps and onward, you're dealing with these spores that release small clouds of damaging gas. Yippee. Probably most annoying are these birds that dive bomb into the ground right near you, knocking you backwards, quite often off the nearest ledge you happen to be close to. The fact this comprises most of the enemies and the fact that you'll encounter them for most of the game means a lot of the combat encounters are really tedious and often frustrating. Killing them ends up being a bit of a chore, and don't even get me started on those hitboxes for the Venus flytraps. There's tougher enemies in the game with higher health pools, and these things are a lot more skill based, requiring circle strafing to avoid taking damage and outright avoiding some of the more powerful attacks. I just wish they had more of these enemies and not the other ones. I think another key issue with this game is its pacing. I mean, for starters, it's not the longest game ever made. I've read online that some people claim it took them 10 hours to finish, which I find kind of staggering, because I took less than half that time, and that was with searching every single nook and cranny. The first few areas in Eden are kinda slow and boring because you don't have all that many weapons or items to play with. Once you leave Eden, there's a costume change and you get some better toys to play with, and it picks up for a while before it slows down again as there's a really tedious segment as you're moving through the swamps and down a river. Before it picks up again for the last third or so of the game, and you're basically just kicking all kinds of ass with all of Julie's arsenal at your disposal. Then once it starts to get a good stride, the whole thing just ends with a cliffhanger ending that I guess will never get resolved. Jedi Outcast, another third-person game on the Quake 3 engine which shares a lot of similarities with Heavy Metal, has similar pacing. It's got that same kind of story structure where you start off kind of weak, and throughout the course of the game you're learning new skills, advancing and becoming more capable as a character. At the point in the narrative when you'd finally truly grasped your capabilities wasn't honestly until you were well into the game, but then from that point on you had free reign with your skills for like another 5 or 6 hours of gameplay. In Heavy Metal, just when it starts to get to that point where it's really taking off, it ends. It's the ultimate cock tease. Go and search for the penguin on Urban Dictionary for a perfect analogy of what I'm talking about. Heavy Metal kind of reminds me a bit of a game like Bayonetta before Bayonetta even existed. It's a really cool and early example of a strong, powerful female protagonist at a time when you didn't see female characters in these kind of games. I mean, Kate Archer and Joanna Dark were around the same time too, but you didn't see them wearing leather bikinis or chopping aliens to pieces with a fire sword. It's a damn shame the game shows its age in a lot of key areas, and if you're used to the smooth platforming controls of more recent games and are expecting fluid combat, well, then you're probably going to be disappointed. Heavy Metal does require a fair bit of tolerance and patience from the player, especially if this is your first time playing it and you're lacking those magical rose-tinted nostalgia glasses. I think, however, the story is still interesting, the art style is gorgeous, and it has a wicked sense of humour that still makes it fun to play, short as it may be.